In the interest of time, I will shorten this talk. Appreciate everybody staying so late. Dr. Nordland said a lot of what we want to talk about, but just a few comments. Initially, when we were doing DSEC, there certainly was a surgeon bias to use thick tissue because it was easy to handle. You could use forceps for insertion, and it was a pretty straightforward, easy procedure. In 2007 and 2008, we began noticing that thickness seemed to matter, and we first reported at the ASCRS annual meeting in 2009 and then published in Cornea in 2011 that the thinner the DSEC tissue, the better the visions we were seeing. And of course, as Mike mentioned, Busen then got tissue around 80 microns and labeled it ultra thin and saw that he got improved in visual acuity. So I agree that DMEC will always give the best vision, but there are bias against DMEC for its time and its rebubble rate. And as Mike pointed out, there are cases in which a surgeon may opt for DSEC. So it was our goal to see if we can get the DSEC procedure as good as possible, and we thought thickness would matter. So we worked with the eye bank, and I was convinced with good technicians that we could get the tissue under 50 microns. And so our first cases were 33 cases under 50 microns. Our average thickness was 41 microns with a range of 26 to 50. And to differentiate this from ultra thin, which is really around 80 to 90 microns, we use the term nano thin, and that's designated under 50 microns. And we published the technique, the eye bank technique, in the journal Cornea earlier this year, and you can review that. But basically, each technician, eye bank technician, comes up with their own nomogram for how they're going to cut thin tissue. There's certainly a lot of advantages, and I think the key about getting the tissue thinner and thinner is that once the DSEC tissue is in the eye, no matter if it's 30 microns or 80 micron, it behaves the same. The surgical technique is quite straightforward. I'll go to the next video just to save time. So this was actually the thinnest tissue we've used to date, which is 17 microns. And you certainly have to use an inserter to get this tissue in the eye. You really certainly can't use forceps. So prior to placing it on an inserter, and this is the endoserter, it is a little bit more challenging to handle because it's so thin. But once it's in the inserter, again, thickness does not matter in terms of how it behaves in the eye. Again, this behaves just like 100 micron tissue and certainly can be used for those challenging cases. So we looked at our first 33 cases, and we found our visual acuity was certainly much, much better than was reported with other series of even ultra-thin visual acuity. And as Mike showed this slide, there's definitely best visual acuity we'll get with DMEC, but we do see that when we compare DMEC to DSEC in the literature, it's always referring to the older DSEC thinner tissue. And so we think that we'd like to compare it to the latest thin tissue, and that would be nanothin. We just got a paper accepted on this paper accepted that Mike talked about 20 consecutive eyes comparing nanothin to DMEC. As Mike showed, by the 3-month data point, we have the same visual acuity, and certainly at 6 and 12 months. Again, by 6 months and 12 months, the percent of 2025 is the same. So in conclusion, we know that DMEC will give the best visual acuity, but those surgeons who still want to be DSEC surgeons, or those eyes that are especially challenged, we would advocate that you work with your eye bank and to use thinner tissue as possible. We think with your technicians working with the tissue and looking at your nomograms, it's not hard to get nanothin tissue, and we almost get it in every case now. Our tissue loss initially was a bit high, but now it's under 5% in preparation of nanothin, and we advocate nanothin tissue in those surgeons who are using the DSEC procedure. Thank you.